Tonight on Politics Unplugged, state lawmakers have been in session for 3 months, so what have they accomplished and what still needs to be done? We speak with one of the legislative leaders. Heading into the 2026 midterms, Arizona Democrats are fighting with each other instead of Republicans. What is the political fallout? And President Trump makes a double endorsement in Arizona's pivotal governor's race. Our panel breaks it all down now on Politics Unplugged.
Good evening, I'm political editor Dennis Welch, and this is Politics Unplugged, and we're deep into the legislative session. A good time to step back and see where things stand after 3 months. We invited Republican leadership from the legislature to join us, but they declined our invitation. House Minority Leader Oscar de los Santos is here to give us kind of a perspective from the Democratic point of view. And let's talk about one of the big things you accomplished just happened the other day. The governor signed a bill into law that protects the program that delivers services to 60,000 people with disabilities, protected funding for that. They were about to lose money here within a matter of days. Right. You got some emergency funding that they could stay open and stay operational until the end of the fiscal year. Tell us about this.
Dennis, this was a huge bipartisan victory for the state of Arizona and for these families who did an incredible job advocating. Let's take us back to where this started. In February, the Republican chairman of the Appropriations Committee said we would have a 50% cut to this program. And then the far-right Freedom Caucus took it further and wanted to kill the program entirely. Thanks to the steadfast advocacy of these incredible families who were at the Capitol day after day after day, thanks to Governor Hobbs's leadership issuing a bill moratorium and House Democrats who voted no on every single bill until we got this deal done. We are now at a place where we saved that program and are going to provide life-saving critical services for people with disabilities. And I'm incredibly proud of the role that House Democrats played.
Yeah, and Republicans were saying, though, in the beginning, at the very least, they were saying they were concerned about the growth of the program. They were concerned about spending. They were making sure that everything was on the up and up and to try to limit any kind of waste or any kind of fraud. Did you guys give Republicans anything to that end on this final deal?
What we have in this bipartisan negotiation is an audit. So we're going to have an audit of the Parents as Paid Caregiver programs. We also put in some common sense reforms that we agreed with parents. So for example, care can be provided only from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. That's not something we love, but it was something we were willing to negotiate in, because the big picture here is we needed to save this program when the Republicans on the far right were trying to cut it entirely. So we think this is a tremendous and significant win for those families. Another piece here is that the Republicans were trying to take this money from the Housing Trust Fund. Sure. They were trying to defund projects to take on the housing affordability crisis and to tackle homelessness in order to fund this. That was absolutely off the table for Democrats, and I'm thrilled to say that $0 and 0 cents are coming out of the Housing Trust Fund.
And let's go back to the Parents as Paid Caregivers, because this is really kind of at the heart of the issue. Republicans were wanting to cap the pay that the parents could get money, and this is a COVID-era program, wanted to cap that at 20 hours per week. The governor, Democrats, wanted to double that, 40 hours a week. Where did you guys come up with the 40 hours? How did you guys arrive at that number?
So what's important to know is that every child who is a beneficiary of this program is medically assessed. And so their medical team tells them, hey, you deserve X number of hours, 50 hours, 40 hours, 30 hours of care. And we think that these children with disabilities should be getting the entire care that they need, because some of these children have multiple seizures a day. Some of them need to be fed through feeding tubes. And so for us, any cut to hours is a cut to those life-saving services. Republicans wanted to cut the program entirely, and so we settled at 40 hours a week as a negotiation.
And also Republicans, in addition to that, Republicans also wanted to be able to vote on whether to continue the waivers year after year. Explain that a little bit.
Correct. So what they wanted to do was they said, hey, we'll give you the funding for 1 year, but you're going to kill this program in September 30, 2027. We said absolutely not. The family said absolutely not, because the reason that this program exists is that there are no direct care workers for these children with disabilities. And so what this program was created to do was to provide the parents of children with disabilities with the training and certification so that they can provide that life-saving care to their own children. It was a true workforce solution program, so ending it in 2027 made absolutely no sense.
And you mentioned the people that this affects. So, 60,000 people with disabilities depend on these programs, and a lot of those folks, family members, people with cerebral palsy, people with these conditions showed up at the Capitol.
They did.
Talk a little bit about how that affected the way, this fight was being seen down at the legislature and maybe in the public.
Wow. Well, those families did an incredible job organizing and advocating, and I just want to say thank you to them. It was a tremendous show that they came down every single day and advocated for their family members and for their children, and they had a tremendous impact on the House Democratic Caucus. We stood by them every single day. I think they had a huge effect on some of the House Republicans, namely Julie Willoughby, who helped negotiate this deal with House Democratic Assistant Leader Nancy Gutierrez. They were the key figures who brought this together. And the reason they were able to bring the deal together is because they were working with those families and parents.
Yeah, because I think it's also important to really stress here, too. This was a bipartisan
Absolutely.
bill, and particularly in the Senate, there was only one no vote.
Right.
You had a handful in the House, but Julie Willoughby, Republican, had been kind of wanting to cut a bipartisan deal for quite a while now, right?
She did, and we could have had this bipartisan deal weeks and weeks ago. The problem was that David Livingston and Matt Gress, who lead the Appropriations Committee, killed Julie Willoughby's bill. They killed a Republican proposal by stuffing the Appropriations Committee with 3 extra Republicans to kill this Republican bipartisan deal. And so we could have done this weeks ago, and frankly, I'm very disappointed in them, but I'm glad that Representative Willoughby and Representative Gutierrez were able to come together to negotiate this deal.
Okay, let's spend, we got about a minute left. Let's just wrap up. What's left to be done? What do Democrats want to see? We're past the 100-day mark. Most of the bills that have been moved through committees are getting voted on. What is left to be done?
2 big things: the budget.
Sure.
And so we're keeping a close eye on that. Unfortunately, it looks like Trump's tariffs and awful federal cuts are going to have a huge impact on the state budget.
That's the big question on the budget. I mean, it's just like, what are the revenue projections? My understanding is not as rosy as they were coming into the year.
That is true, and a part of the difficulty in those projections is the volatility. And when you have such chaos at the federal level, it makes it difficult to plan for the future. But the second thing is House Democrats are focused on getting affordability for working families. The Republicans, for example, have a proposal to give tax cuts to people who own private planes. That's ridiculous. So in these final days of the session, we're going to be focused on killing those kinds of insane proposals and tax giveaways to the wealthy and really providing relief for working families.
All right, the Democratic House Minority Leader, Oscar de los Santos, thanks for joining us here today.
Thank you, Dennis.
And still ahead, I'm bringing in our panel to talk about all of this week's major headlines, including fighting among the top Democrats in Arizona over the state's party leadership. That's next, right here on Politics Unplugged. Welcome back to Politics Unplugged. After disappointing results in last November's election, the state Democratic Party made a change in leadership. But some of the top elected Democrats in the state aren't happy about it. Time to bring in our panel, Democratic consultant Tony Cani and Daniel Scarpinato, the former chief of staff to Governor Doug Ducey. Thanks for being here. Let's start with you. You're the Democrat here at the table.
I am.
Big fight there. You got all the 2 U.S. senators from Arizona. You got the governor, the attorney general, and the secretary.
All of them. All the statewide.
All the statewide. Just all the statewide. Really upset with the party chair. What's going on here?
Well, when this chair was elected by members of the state committee, all of the statewide elected officials started to work with him, which, if you're very deeply involved in this, so I think a lot of the viewers are, isn't that common that you're meeting weekly with all the statewides. And one of the things they did together was they came up with a process to hire a new executive director. And so they've been working together this entire time. And I think what ended up happening was people thought things were going well. And then all of a sudden, when the process, all of these statewides were on a part of this hiring committee, at least their representatives were. And then all of a sudden, the chair went a different direction.
Yeah, he's accusing,
sort of dishonest.
He's accusing all the statewide, or at least the senators, of intimidating him.
Yeah, which is
and
they were
threatening him.
Let me tell you something. Like, they were a part of the hiring committee, right? So like it's not like they swooped in at the end. One thing I think it's important to note is that like, unlike some of the previous party fights that have happened around the country, this is not an ideological battle. This is not like the left wing or the right wing. And so to some extent, I think that means that this will be shorter lived because it's more about sort of trust and competence. And right now, you know, even the staff union at the state party even came out saying that some of the things in that letter were not correct. And so I do think that, you know, a solution needs to come up. I think that it's true that the vast majority of elected officials and party officials have lost confidence in this party chair, and I hope that they can come to some sort of a solution.
Let's talk about the branding, the political fallout on this. I mean, I don't think any voter next year is going to go to the polls and say, I'm not voting for the Democrat because they had that ugly fight there with the state leaders and whatnot. But this maybe does go to branding because we've seen polls recently that shows the Democratic brand not very popular with voters. And this just kind of adds to that, right?
Well, luckily on the Republican side, we all get along and everything is perfect.
You never secretly record the party chair.
So I guess my message would be welcome to the club. And if you need any group therapy, I'm happy to participate. But no, seriously, I mean, we actually have a great party chair right now on the Republican side, but we've seen these issues for 20 years on the Republican side. I think the main reason this could matter in 2026 is that the Democrats have done a much more effective job at utilizing the state party as a vehicle. You know, Katie Hobbs has run her entire campaigns through the state party, which reduces the cost of these campaigns greatly. So if this tension isn't resolved, I think it could be an impediment, but you're right that most people don't care, and I think the state party structure on both sides is just less important than it was 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, and could this affect the fallout be particularly for candidates down ballot? Because there were reports, you know, that one of the senators had told the party chairman he wasn't going to participate in fundraising anymore. That hurts the party with the amount of money that they raise, that they spend on those lower level races.
Well, it does. It hurts potentially the amount of money that the state Democratic Party spends in those lower level races. The money that is available to these candidates and they're being raised to try and take the House and the Senate, that money is still going to go somewhere. The question is, where is it going to go if this isn't resolved at the party level? And so I do think that there is a concern. It would be great if we weren't having this fight. It would be great if these types of challenges that come up often at political parties were being handled behind the scenes and not in a public letter in a way that things could have gotten resolved. And I think that, you know, that is part of the problem here is it shows sort of a lack of judgment on the part of the party chair that he took this into the media before having a conversation with even the statewide he was upset with.
Yeah, and if they can't figure this out, we've already seen a model that was done before. I mean, John McCain was doing this for years. He was running a lot of the operation out of a county Democrat, Republican Party, correct?
He was, and you know, I mean, the other element to this is the Democrats, to their credit, have had great success at winning statewide elections in Arizona the last few cycles. Unfortunately, most of the people they've elected don't like each other and don't get along with each other.
They all agreed on this, right? I don't know if I agree with your assessment, but I'll say that's a big sign to people. They all agreed on this.
So I think that, you know, when you start winning these elections, when you start getting into power, you start to see more of these divides. And you're seeing that right now between the governor, the legislature, the governor, the attorney general, secretary of state, et cetera, and now the state party.
All right, let me ask you too. This win on the disability funding how big of a win for the governor is this? Is about one of the big achievements of her as she starts heading into re-election?
Yeah, I think it's a big win. Part of the reason is because I think that this could have been resolved a long time ago, but there was an attempt to kind of play politics with it, and in the end, that bipartisan solution that Willoughby presented that was killed because of these changes to the committee that made it there be more Republicans than there normally are. Like, that could have solved this problem, and I think what ended up happening was the blowback, the organizing, all the stuff that Oscar spoke about. I think that moved the legislators, and now this is a win for the governor.
Yeah, let's get your thoughts on this. Obviously, you got some personal connections with Matt Gress running some of the bills. I mean, we just have to kind of disclose some of that. But, you know, is this the kind of fight that makes Republicans look bad?
Well, I spend as little time at the legislature these days as possible. I spent a decade of my life down there. So I think that what I would say is this was a really positive development. This was a good deal that funded the program, which these families rely on. But let's be honest. the program was not properly executed, which is how we got into this problem. And I think the big point that was left out in the prior discussion is that this bill represents the largest shift in executive power to the legislature that I've ever seen. And I say that as somebody who spent 10 years in the governor's office. The fact that the governor now has to get legislative approval simply to ask the federal government how to run one of her agencies. If I was chief of staff to Governor Ducey and this bill came up, I'm not sure that I would have advised to sign that portion of the bill. Because when you're advising the executive, you're always trying to make sure that you're not being hamstrung by the legislature. This is a huge shift that the governor acquiesced to prevent the same scenario from happening next time. Hopefully it results in the program being more sustainable moving forward.
Okay, and let's wrap up on this topic. And Governor issued another veto this past week on the so-called ICE Act. This would have compelled local law enforcement, state prisons to work with federal immigration officials. She vetoed that. Is this good or bad for her heading into the election? Whoever wants to take this.
I think that this is another attempt for them to just sort of do theater around the immigration stuff. And I don't think this is going to have a huge impact. It'll be a thing they might try and run ads on, this kind of stuff. But I think that most of the, localities, they want to have control over what it is that they're doing when it comes to enforcement. They wanted to pick their own priorities. They want to, manage their own budget, that kind of stuff. And so I think that in this, it was a good government veto. Mm-hmm. It might be a political issue, but you know what? Just like with the fact that, she was willing to make a change, like you said with the executive, it's because the result is what was important more than the politics.
I'll give you the last word on this.
I think it was not as politically a damaging veto as vetoing a bill to increase penalties on fentanyl dealers, opposing the Secure Border Act, dismantling the border strike force. So her record is already so poor on this that I don't think that this makes it any worse than it already was.
And real quick, we're way over time with this segment anyway, but given the fact that we've seen the border numbers drop with encounters and all this, do you think that's going to be the issue it has been in the last couple of election cycles?
I think you're onto something. I think it will always be an issue in Arizona, but I think there's actually a general sense that Donald Trump has fixed a lot of the problems at the border. So I would anticipate that it may not be as animating an issue in 2026 as it was in 2024.
All right, we're going to have to end this segment right here. We'll take a quick break, but up next, there are two key Republicans already in the race for governor, and President Trump has endorsed both of them. So how is that going to work? That's next on Politics Unplugged. To get more in-depth on the issues, check out the Politics Unplugged podcast. This week, we talk with Democratic consultant Stacey Pearson about the infighting among the party leadership. The Politics Unplugged podcast drops every Sunday evening wherever you get your podcasts. And this may be the opposite of infighting. Two big-name Republicans have entered the governor's race, and President Trump has endorsed both of them. So how much is a split endorsement worth, and how is that going to play out? Our panelists here sticking around to explain all this. Daniel, unpack this for me. We got a double endorsement here, not unusual for President Trump to actually do this. He's done this in Arizona before, but we always like to look at winners and losers. Who are there winners and losers in this double endorsement?
So here's how I see this, is he's endorsed both Karen Taylor Robeson and Congressman Andy Biggs. The Trump endorsement is very important in a primary. I also would say it's important in a general election. Trump won the state by 5.5 points. So for a Republican to have a winning coalition next November, I think it's an important endorsement. They are going to have a spirited fight here. I mean, the difference this cycle is there is no Kari Lake. And whatever you want to say about Kari Lake, she got people really ramped up about the governor's race. This I see as being a more traditional race where getting around the state and going to Lincoln Day dinners, raising money, shaking hands, having a message is going to be much more important than last cycle because we don't have a candidate who's a juggernaut with 90% name ID who is kind of injecting a force into this race. I think right now most people don't even know a governor's race is occurring. And so I think there's a long way to go on this.
And what's your take on this? You see the two Republicans on the other side there, and I think when I look at Andy Biggs, I see somebody who's probably like a little bit MAGA before MAGA. I mean, he is somebody who's been a long conservative Republican in this state. He's been had a tight relationship with President Trump for a while. I think the MAGA voter out there looks at him and sees him as being authentic with that. On the other hand, you got Karen Taylor Robeson. I mean, I think what people see with her is somebody who can self-fund, somebody who can spend a whole lot of money. We'll talk about some of that money here in just a second, but what's your read?
Oh, I think that obviously the Taylor Robeson campaign would have liked to have the endorsement alone, which they had for a little while, but then they didn't have anymore. So I think that that's a fact. I think that this is going to be an extraordinarily expensive primary. And while Karen Taylor Robeson might have the most money from her own wealth that she can put in, I suspect there's going to be a lot of money coming in from the outside to support Congressman Biggs too. And so the question is, just how messy is this going to be? And I think it's going to be rough. I think it's going to be rough and tumble. I think that the authenticity bit with Robeson, I think it comes from something other than ideology, because in the last race, there really wasn't much room between what she was saying she would do if she won and what Kari Lake was saying what she would do. I think it was just a matter of voters just didn't connect with her, and they didn't really buy that she was a government outsider, that she was, when she, been a lobbyist for 20 some years, right? So I think those are the kind of things that she's gonna have to overcome, and she's gonna have the money to do it. And so I wonder whether or not the resolution for her is she's going to spend a ton of money to tell people I was endorsed by Trump, thinking that that's going to be enough.
And who do you see the stronger candidate in a general election? Not asking for you to pick sides in the primary, but in a different way, like who is stronger in a primary? Someone like Karen Taylor Robeson, everybody a couple of years ago thought, oh, if Robeson wins this primary, she's going to easily win and beat Katie Hobbs in the general election. Is that the same kind of dynamic this time around, that maybe Andy Biggs doesn't appeal to a broader array of voters than Robeson would?
Well, I got out of the prediction business a couple cycles ago, but I think that the reality is part of the value of a primary is you do learn who the best candidate is, and somebody comes out of it usually in a better position. I mean, Governor Ducey talked about this when he ran. He was in a 17-way primary. Yeah. Fred Duvall had no primary. He came out fresh as a flower, had never done a debate. So there is something about a primary that I actually think can strengthen candidates. But at the end of the day, this is going to be competitive. I mean, what I would caution Democrats of is they sometimes celebrate the Republican infighting and think it's going to pay dividends for them. But what we've seen in Arizona is all these races are really close in the general election. I mean, Kari Lake lost the U.S. Senate race by 2.5 points. That was surprising to a lot of people. She lost the governor's race by 17,000 votes. So I think we should just anticipate that this will be a barn burner in the general election, and whoever comes out of the primary, it's going to be in the margin, and it's going to come down to the wire. We'll probably find out 10 days after Election Day of 2026 who the governor is.
Yeah, and is Andy Biggs, I mean, raising the kind of money, you said it's going to be a very expensive primary. Is he raising the kind of money he needs? It seems like he's off to a slow start. I think he raised $188,000 in the first quarter. He's going to need a whole lot more than that if he's going to compete against Karen Taylor Robeson.
Yeah, I mean, I think, of course, last time, Karen Taylor Robeson was able to outspend Kari Lake too. So I think that that's an important thing when it comes to the amount of resources they're going to spend. I don't want to minimize it, but I do suspect he's going to probably have a lot of outside money coming in to help him if his fundraising doesn't pick up. Either way, it's going to be a tough fight. And so, I'm glad that Daniel said he doesn't think Republicans are super excited about either of the candidates. But
I didn't say that.
I know. I
said I don't think people know. I'm not even sure people know who the current governor is. I think that there's a lack of awareness around this. And I do think one thing on the fundraising is Katie Hobbs has $4 million. That's $4 million more than anybody else has. That's 1 month of television on this station and others. It's going to take a lot more than that. I think the fundraising kind of was a little lackluster, personally.
All right, we're going to have to end it right there. That is all the time we have. But be sure to join us next week for more Politics Unplugged. Good night.